Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where it seems we've woken up from a nightmare, as the light gun videos have returned. And where else can we go but to the 128-bit era, as we check out the Dreamcast light gun. The simply named Dreamcast Gun was released by Sega in 1999 in Japan, Europe and Australia, with the gun itself being more or less identical between these regions, outside a few logo changes on the sticker obviously. But the actual styling and the colour were the same, with a style that feels like it harkens back more to the Menacer than the Stunner, with this sci-fi, less real look about it. Even with this look, Sega decided not to release the gun in America, as events at the time, well, they didn't think it would make the gun particularly welcome, so instead they let a third party release a licensed gun instead, which was the Mad Catz Dream Blaster, that looks a little like a barcode scanner. But we're not here to talk about that gun, so instead let's look at this in more detail. Which was sold either on its own, in this very simple looking box, or with House of the Dead 2. This one is obviously unboxed, and I got it second hand, which might go to explain why the trigger feels so mushy. There really isn't much in the way of feedback when you pull it. This seems to be a common complaint, as there's even mods that you can do to add a decent micro switch to it, that I might have to try, as this would feel so much nicer with a definitive click. Now this isn't the only button on the gun, as round the back under your thumb we find two buttons and a D-pad. Those buttons map to B and start, which makes it perfect for navigating menus, and these are also a little bit mushy, but that's really less of an issue here, as these buttons don't get too much use. Now you might have noticed that the top of the gun is a little bit wider than the rest of the body, which makes sense as they needed the space for a VMU, which slots in here just as it would with a regular controller, though I do have to point out that it's actually upside down to how it normally would be. You could instead fit a rumble pack if you wanted, but seeing there's only a single space, I think having the VMU might be the preferred option. But if you don't want to save and you want the gun to rumble, then you can do that instead. It connects to the console via the standard port, there's no extra cables needed, and due to the type of light gun it is, it will only work on a CRT, so I'm going to be using my recently fixed up unit. It is very flat. That can make a few of the light guns feel a little less accurate than on a curved screen, but I don't find it too much of an issue myself. Now in terms of games, this wasn't all that well supported, so due to the small number of games I figured it'd be fun to briefly check them all out, while putting the Dreamcast gun through its paces. And where else could we start but with
The House of the Dead
2. A game whose menu shows they actually put a bit of effort in, as we have a few extra game modes, which is a welcome change after some of the more bare-boned arcade ports that the Saturn got. Now these include an original mode that lets you select weapons and upgrades at the start of the mission, or the more faithful arcade mode, which is exactly what it says on the tin. This is just good hammed up horror fun, and the action is fast and more or less constant. Now something that I didn't really notice in the arcade when I used to play it, but I have here, is the fact that lots of the objects can be interacted with, from knocking over bikes to breaking lights and barrels. Now most of them won't really do anything, but every so often it might give you something instead. But I think more often than not it's about trying to make the environments feel more alive. Well, more alive than the undead that you're constantly fighting against anyway. The extra buttons on the controller, they don't get too much of a workout. There's no special attacks, and outside of the menus the only button that will get any real use is the B button, and that's to skip the cutscenes. Reloading is the classic point off the screen and shoot, so you don't even have a button for that.
place over there.
The second game was provided on the Sega Smash Pack. That also helps indicate something that I've mentioned previously, and that is the VMU is upside down, and we can see that when it shows the icon for the selected game. But once Virtua Cop 2 loads and detects the light gun, it will flip the image around so it's correct. The game itself, well, it's quite basic in terms of options. But once we get into the game, we'll actually see a bunch of changes. It's obviously higher resolution with crisper textures than say the Saturn edition, and now has some real transparencies. But there's also this little lightning effect that happens when you hit a baddie. I don't remember that. But the rest of the game feels more or less the same, which isn't a bad thing. It's always great to come back to Virtua Cop. But it is a shame that they didn't bundle 1 and 2 together on a disc. In Japan they got this as a solo release, and in the US it was part of the Smash Pack, but in the UK, nothing. From what I've read, this isn't a port from the Saturn version, or reported from the arcade, but it was actually the PC version that provided the basis of this edition. It would go some way to explaining why the Windows CE logo was on the startup, but I don't think it explains why the explosions were also changed. Maybe they just wanted to have a bit of fun with it. Because, well, this is still a damn good game. But just an odd one to be included in this compilation, as the rest were mostly Mega Drive or Genesis games. And this one really stands out like a sore thumb. I wonder if they were just looking for something to throw on the GD-ROM and then figured that they couldn't sell this game on its own in the US. So, on it went, seeing it was already done. The next game is Death Crimson OX, which never made it to the PAL shores, so I have to play the Japanese release, as the US one, well, it won't run on this console, or at least it doesn't like the light gun. Which is surprising seeing that we got the official light gun, but not all of the official games. The only thing I can be thankful for is that wasn't the case for all the US releases. Some of the others we can play here. But it does mean that for this one, I have absolutely no idea what's going on because everything is in Japanese. And in game, you just seem to be fighting suits of armor, and they just constantly come at you. It's like an even weirder take on House of the Dead, as all sorts of random things will show up to attack you. It's all very bizarre, and it doesn't take long before you're at a boss fight. And what, the weak point is the sword? Are we meant to believe that our gun is shooting back the sword when he tries to swing it? I didn't find too much unique about the game from what little I played. But it was fun, and I do plan to go back and put more time into it, even if I have no idea what's going on and why I'm doing what I'm doing. But it seems it must have been popular as there was a Death Crimson 2 released for the Dreamcast in Japan. And this game itself got ported to the PS2 under the name Guncom 2. But all I can really say for now is, stay Crimson. The name's Mission. Confidential Mission. And this was the only other PAL light gun game that was released. which turns out to be a sort of Virtua Cop take on James Bond, as it has a spy plot that starts you off trying to steal some data. This obviously goes wrong, and it seems that we gotta try and capture the world's strongest floppy disk, all while shooting henchmen in a very Virtua Cop inspired style. As you get those reducing targets and the zoom ins to where everyone is. But it also has hints of the House of the Dead, as the story and the lines are really quite hammed up.
You cannot escape!
A gas attack.
It's coming through the vents.
It does exactly what a light gun game needs to do, and that is give you lots of targets that will come in from all sorts of directions, as well as trying to hide behind things as well. But that's not all it does, as every so often you'll get a challenge thrown in, like having to bung up these gas vents, that will leave you with this warped vision for a little while. It's a very nice touch. There was even this one-shot event, which I managed to miss, even with this guy's magic telescopic eyes, and I assume the story branches at these points. What I find quite funny though, is that the enemy must own this museum and must have been planning this for such a long time, as they've managed to fit so much firepower into these old relics. I don't know what's worse, shooting at me or shooting at me from a prized artifact. How could you do that? The last game we'll look at is Demolition Racer No Exit, where if we go into the extras, there's this big car hunter minigame. And with the light gun, in port D this time, we'll find a mostly simple target shoot game, with cars arriving from the distance with a Virtua Cop style indicator to give you a heads up. And obviously you need to hit them before they'll hit you. Now every so often you do have to switch to one of the other sides of the track and then repeat the process. And this is one of the very few instances where a game uses the extra buttons on the light gun. So well done, Demolition Racer. But apart from that, there isn't too much here. As the game progresses, the number of cars increases, and the wrecks will start to obscure your view. Which is when things start to get a lot more difficult. And the more times you get hit, the more damage your screen becomes, which will also make things more difficult. For a minigame, it's actually quite a nice extra. Overall, this isn't a bad light gun. Yeah, the buttons should have been better, and it really could have done with more support, but then you could say that about the Dreamcast as a whole. Its accuracy, even with a flat tube TV, was quite good, and once calibrated, I tended to hit most of the shots that I took. Which you'd really hope for by this point, seeing that Sega had 4 generations of light gun game experience behind them. But this is a hard one to recommend, mostly due to the lack of games, particularly in the UK, but I have to say I did have a lot of fun with the ones that I played. And there we have it, the Dreamcast light gun. I'd be interested to know if you had one of these back in the day, and if you did, what was your favourite game? There's so many to choose from. I'd also like to know if you have any light guns or games you think we should cover on the channel, and if you do, let me know down in the comments. So until next time, I've been the Goldfish. That was one of Sega's probably least most supported peripherals, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching me get back into these light gun videos. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, then you can take a shot and hit those buttons below, or you can take the alternative route of watching some of my other videos. Or if you'd like to talk things out, then you can catch me on my Discord.